The human ship drifted slowly in the vast emptiness of space, its sleek exterior gleaming under the dim light of distant stars. To the aliens who observed from a nearby asteroid, it seemed ordinary at first. But when their sensors scanned the vessel, things quickly took an unexpected turn. The ship's design was unlike any they had encountered. Where other species relied on compact, highly efficient systems, the human ship appeared to be overloaded with redundant equipment. Extra engines, spare life support units, and weapons that seemed excessive for its size. Captain Theric, the commander of the alien fleet, frowned as he reviewed the data. The ship wasn't just over-engineered. It was absurdly over-engineered. Each system was duplicated, triplicated in some cases, as if the humans feared the possibility of any one of them failing. What is the purpose of all this? He muttered under his breath, his thoughts turning in confusion. For the aliens, efficiency was everything. In their advanced civilization, streamlined design, and minimalism were key principles. Why would a species deliberately add so much extra weight to their ships? "Captain, we're getting unusual readings," said his first officer, scanning the ship's readout. "Their engines are running at full capacity, but there's no sign of any immediate need for such power. It's almost as if they expect something." Theric's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, his alien eyes glowing faintly as he focused on the human ship's movements. The vessel wasn't just coasting, it was ready. There was no hesitation in the way it moved. It was clear that the humans had prepared for more than just a peaceful journey through the stars. There was an undeniable purpose in their design, but what that purpose was, Theric couldn't yet determine. "We should send a reconnaissance team to learn more," the first officer suggested. "We can't risk underestimating them, not with all these redundancies." Theric nodded, reluctantly agreeing. "Prepare a shuttle. Keep the team discreet. We need answers." A group of elite alien soldiers, trained for covert operations, boarded the shuttle and made their way to the human ship. As they approached the vessel, they were struck by how ordinary it seemed. No signs of advanced weaponry or external defenses. Just an unassuming ship, floating in space, surrounded by the vast silence. When they landed, the door hissed open, and a group of humans stood waiting for them. Their expressions were calm, almost amused. "Welcome aboard," said the human captain, extending a hand. "I hope you find everything to your liking." The alien team was taken aback by the human captain's apparent ease. They had expected tension, perhaps even hostility. But instead, the humans seemed entirely at ease, as though they had been expecting this visit all along. "Why so much redundancy?" Theric's lead soldier asked, unable to keep the question to himself. "Your ship is overbuilt. Why carry so much excess weight?" The human captain smiled slightly, as though he were about to share a secret. "You'll understand soon enough." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. There was something about the humans' demeanor, too calm, too confident, that made them nervous. They could tell there was more going on here than simple over-engineering. The captain wasn't telling them everything, but he wasn't lying either. The mystery deepened. As the team moved deeper into the ship, they saw more evidence of this strange philosophy. Backup reactors, additional weapons arrays, duplicate navigation systems. Everything had a backup. Everything had a fail-safe. The redundant systems weren't just for show. They were clearly designed for emergencies, for when the unexpected happened. But what exactly had the humans encountered that made them design their ships this way? Theric's curiosity burned, but he knew one thing for certain. He needed to learn more. There was more to the humans than met the eye. The alien team moved cautiously through the human ship, their boots making soft echoes in the dimly lit corridors. It was a stark contrast to the bustling alien ships they were used to, where every inch of space was optimized for efficiency and speed. Here, the human vessel felt different. The walls were a bit too thick, the equipment just a little too much. The redundancy was overwhelming. The human captain led them through the ship, smiling with an almost unnerving calm. "I assume your sensors have already done their work," he said, as they passed through a large chamber filled with what looked like entirely duplicate sets of engines, navigation consoles, and backup life support systems. The captain gestured to one of the workstations. "All of it is here because we never know what's going to happen next. Best to be prepared, wouldn't you agree?" Thurok, the leader of the alien delegation, couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were hiding something more than just practical design choices. He studied the captain's face for any sign of discomfort, but found none. The man was unfazed by their questions, his eyes always calm and steady. It was as if he'd seen this curiosity before. One of the alien soldiers, an experienced scout named Klin, stepped forward, her voice cautious but direct. "Your ship seems designed to handle worst-case scenarios, but surely that level of redundancy isn't necessary. No species we've encountered needs this much excess. Your ship could be more efficient, faster, and more maneuverable without all this extra weight. Why not streamline it?" The human captain paused, giving Klin a thoughtful look. "It's true we could reduce the weight," he said slowly, "but it's not just about efficiency. It's about survival. We've learned the hard way that sometimes the unexpected happens, and when it does, you need to be able to keep moving forward." He motioned toward a nearby panel that flickered with lights. "Systems fail. Enemies attack. Natural disasters occur. The universe doesn't care about your plans. We prepare for the things that can't be predicted, and that's what keeps us alive." The captain's words hung in the air, leaving the alien soldiers momentarily silent. Klin frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, but before she could press further, one of the other aliens spoke up. "This isn't just about a few redundant parts," the soldier said. "You're practically drowning your ship in backups. We've encountered ships with 1 or 2 extra systems. But it's like you're planning for every possible disaster." "Maybe we are," the captain replied with a shrug. "You can never be too careful." The alien team exchanged uneasy glances. Their mission had been to investigate the human vessel, to understand how such a primitive species could have advanced this far in space travel. But now, as they stood aboard this ship, surrounded by systems designed for every imaginable emergency, they realized that the humans weren't just survivors. They were prepared in a way that none of them could comprehend. Thurok found himself growing increasingly intrigued. The humans weren't simply building a better ship. They were building a vessel that could endure anything the universe threw at it. The captain's calmness, in the face of his people's apparent over-engineering, made it clear that this was not just a philosophical choice, it was a survival instinct. "Tell me," Thurok finally said, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and authority. "What happens if your systems fail? What's the backup for the backup?" The captain's smile remained. "We don't let them fail." The cryptic answer only deepened the mystery. It was clear the humans were hiding something more than just an obsession with redundancy. And as the alien team continued their exploration of the ship, the unease among them began to grow. What kind of creatures were these humans who could design a ship like this and still be so nonchalant about their own survival? The more they learned, the more questions arose. The answers they sought seemed just out of reach, hidden beneath the surface of what appeared to be an ordinary human ship. But Thurok knew one thing for sure. The closer they got to the truth, the more they realized they had underestimated the humans in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Back aboard their flagship, Captain Thurok stood in front of the massive viewports, gazing out at the stars, though his mind was far from the peaceful vastness of space. His thoughts were consumed by the human ship. The more he thought about it, the less sense it made. There was no logical reason for a species to overload its ships with so much redundant equipment. Even the most efficient ships in the galaxy had contingency plans, extra systems, backups, but the humans had taken it to an extreme. "It's illogical," Thurok muttered to himself, pacing back and forth in his command room. His first officer, Kailas, watched him carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. "You're right, Captain," Kylus said, his voice carrying a note of concern. "We've never encountered a species that does this before. It's as if they're expecting something to go wrong at any moment." "Exactly," Therak replied, his tone sharp. "They're not just preparing for one disaster. They're preparing for every possible disaster. But why? What do they know that we don't? What are they hiding?" The first officer hesitated before answering. Perhaps it's fear. Fear that their technology will fail. Fear that they will be wiped out by something beyond their control. Therak stopped pacing and turned toward his officer. "I don't think it's fear," he said, his voice low. "Fear doesn't drive you to overbuild to this extent. This is something else. It's not about paranoia. It's about control, the control to survive anything. It's like they've accepted that the universe will throw the unexpected at them, and they've designed their ships so that nothing, not even complete system failure, can stop them. But how could they be so sure? What do they know that we don't?" Kylus stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. Could it be some kind of tactical advantage? What if this over-engineering is meant for something more than just surviving the ordinary? Perhaps they believe they're about to face a threat of unimaginable scale. Therak mulled over this, his mind racing. The humans didn't strike him as a species that acted recklessly. They were resourceful, yes, but this level of overcompensation felt almost prescient, as though they were preparing for something they had no choice but to confront. "We need to know more," Therak said, his voice determined. "The human captain said they don't let their systems fail. But what if that's not true? What if their systems have failed before, and they've learned from it?" The alien commander's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden communication from the human ship. The screen flickered to life, revealing the same calm, almost reassuring face of the human captain. "Captain Therak," the human said with a polite smile. "I trust your officers have found everything to their satisfaction. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them. We're always open to visitors." Therak's gut tightened. He had the feeling that the human captain knew exactly what he was thinking. The words "open to visitors" sounded more like an invitation to further scrutiny, as if the humans were waiting for them to ask the right questions. Something in the captain's demeanor made Therak uneasy, like he was being drawn into a game he didn't fully understand. "We are intrigued by your ship's design," Therak replied carefully, studying the human's face. "There's something about your redundancy that doesn't add up. It's as if you're preparing for a catastrophe we don't yet see. I'd like to learn more. Perhaps we could arrange another visit." The human captain's smile widened, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course, Captain. We'll make sure to give you a tour of our most interesting systems. You'll see for yourself why we believe redundancy is essential for survival." The screen flickered off. Therak stared at the empty communication panel, his mind churning. The humans weren't hiding anything obvious. There were no secret weapons, no hidden agenda. But their calmness, their overabundance of precaution, there was something else in play. The humans knew something that made them prepare for everything. "Prepare for another visit," Therak ordered. "And this time, I want to see everything. If we're going to understand them, we need to see the heart of their ship. I want to know why they prepare for disasters that might never come, and what exactly they think is coming for them." Kylus nodded. "Understood, Captain. We'll be ready." As Therak looked out at the distant human ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something much larger than just a simple exploration of an alien vessel. There was a deeper mystery hidden within the human ship, one that could change everything they thought they knew about the universe. The question was no longer just what the humans were hiding. It was why. The stars outside the windows of the alien ship seemed to stretch into infinity, but Captain Therak's mind was consumed by a different kind of distance, one that spanned centuries. He sat in his private quarters, surrounded by the quiet hum of his ship's systems, reflecting on the humans' behavior. They were an enigma. What had shaped them into this cautious, almost obsessive race? Why did they build their ships the way they did, with so much excess, so much redundancy? It was as if their very survival depended on their ability to prepare for every possible failure. His mind turned back to Earth. He had read about their history, their struggles, their wars, their desperate survival against forces far larger and more dangerous than themselves. But perhaps he had missed something. Perhaps there was a lesson hidden deep within their past, something that explained their mindset, and more importantly, their reliance on over-engineering. Therak sat back and began to piece together the story, a story that had shaped the very essence of humanity. The year was 2074. Humanity had barely recovered from the chaos of their earlier centuries. They had fought wars that nearly destroyed their civilization, clashed over resources, and struggled with the harsh realities of survival on a planet that seemed intent on testing them at every turn. Natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, droughts were an ever-present threat, but it wasn't just the forces of nature they had to fear. Humans were masters of invention, but with their inventions came unforeseen consequences. The rise of artificial intelligence, climate change, and overpopulation had brought them to the brink of collapse. Every new breakthrough in technology brought with it a new set of risks, a new set of dangers they couldn't fully understand or control. At the height of their desperation, they learned a hard lesson. There were no guarantees. Systems would fail. Entire cities would lose power in the blink of an eye. Ships would sink in the vast oceans, never to be found again. It wasn't enough to build things that worked. It wasn't even enough to build things that could survive a crisis. They had to prepare for everything. And so, redundancy became their mantra. Early explorers, in their wooden ships, faced storms at sea, pirates, and shipwrecks. Every sailor carried a lifeboat, even if they were not sure they would need it. Backup sails, extra provisions, and tools were standard on every ship, even though they were cumbersome and often unnecessary. But when disaster struck, and it often did, those backup systems were the difference between life and death. As humanity expanded into space, that lesson traveled with them. Their first space missions were filled with failure, explorations that ended in disaster, where lives were lost because the technology failed in ways no one could predict. They learned from every mistake, adding layers of protection to their vessels. Extra engines, redundant communication systems, double life support units. It all became standard. They had no choice. In the unforgiving void of space, there was no room for error. It wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding that the universe was unpredictable. The more humanity explored, the more they realized that they could never anticipate every threat. They had to prepare for the worst, and redundancy was the ultimate safeguard. As Therak pieced together this history, he felt a deeper understanding settle in his mind. The humans weren't overcompensating out of fear. They were overcompensating because they had learned the hardest lessons possible. Their history had been one of survival against impossible odds, and redundancy was their way of ensuring they would never be caught unprepared again. He leaned back in his chair, still reflecting on what he had learned. If we don't understand the past, we can't understand the future, he thought. The humans' obsession with redundancy wasn't an anomaly. It was a deeply ingrained part of their identity, a response to a history marked by failure and triumph in equal measure. The alien commander felt an uneasy respect for humanity growing within him. They were not like any other species he had encountered. While other civilizations had evolved to face challenges head-on, the humans had evolved to ensure they were never caught by surprise. In a galaxy full of unknowns, that kind of foresight was something he couldn't ignore. But even as he pondered the human psyche, a deeper question loomed in his mind. What happens when redundancy isn't enough? What happens when there's something no amount of preparation can protect them from? And that was a question he was not sure he wanted the answer to. Captain Therak sat at the table in the briefing room, staring at the data from the latest mission to the human ship. His thoughts were still heavy from the discoveries he'd made about humanity's past. They were a species defined by survival. By necessity, they had learned to expect the unexpected. But even so, something was still missing. The alien officers around the table were silent, each of them poring over the readings from their latest reconnaissance. The human ship was still surrounded by layers of redundancy, and yet there was something they hadn't seen, something that didn't match up. Therak's gaze flickered over the reports again, noting the subtle discrepancies. "I've been going over the data," said Kailas, his voice tense. "There's something strange about the human ship systems. While we've seen their over-engineering, some of their internal structures don't make sense. It's as if some systems are designed to fail on purpose." Therak's eyes narrowed. "Fail on purpose? What do you mean?" Kailas continued, tapping on his tablet to show the readings. "I'm seeing some systems that are purposely overworked or intentionally left vulnerable. Engines designed to burn hotter than they should, life support systems running at the edge of their capacity. It's not just redundancy. It's like they're built to fail, but in a controlled way." Therak leaned forward, his interest piqued. "So what you're suggesting is that they've designed their systems with known weaknesses that allow them to, what? Adjust to a failure before it becomes critical." Kailas nodded. "Exactly. It's as though they are anticipating the failure of one part, only to rely on another. But they know exactly when and how it will happen, even if we can't predict it." Therak felt a chill run down his spine. If Kailas was right, this wasn't just a precaution. The humans had intentionally created conditions where failure was expected, but they were prepared to turn that failure into an advantage. The design of their systems was almost like a finely tuned dance of chaos and order, where every malfunction served a purpose. "This is deliberate," Therak muttered under his breath. "They're not just surviving. They're controlling their survival." Kailas's words hung in the air. But why? Why deliberately engineer failure? Therak's mind raced. It made no sense. If the humans were willing to expose themselves to these potential vulnerabilities, they must have had a reason. What could they possibly be preparing for that required them to not just survive, but maneuver through disaster on purpose? The answer was as unsettling as it was unclear. "They know something we don't," Therak said slowly. "They're preparing for something they expect to happen, something that requires them to be ready for the worst-case scenario at every turn. But what could be so catastrophic that they need to build their ships this way?" Kailas asked, his voice strained. "We've seen their history. They'd fought wars, survived natural disasters, and even faced the collapse of their civilization. But this is different." Therak stood and turned back toward the viewport. The human ship floated in space, as silent and unassuming as it had been since the first time they had encountered it. But now, to Therak's eyes, it no longer seemed like just another ship. It felt like a warning from a species that had seen something coming, a disaster on the horizon that they had no control over, but could still prepare for. They had designed their ships to endure, to outlast anything that might come their way. "We need to know more about their systems," Therak said, his voice hard with resolve. "We've only seen the surface of their technology. We haven't even scratched the deeper layers yet. The redundancy isn't just a precaution. It's a safeguard for something they expect to happen. We need to find out what that is." The first officer hesitated, then spoke up. "But Captain, are we sure we want to go any deeper? If they're anticipating a disaster on this scale, if it's something that even they fear, what happens when we uncover what they know? What if we're not prepared for what they're really facing?" Therak turned, his eyes narrowing. "We have no choice. We need to understand what's coming, not just for the sake of this mission, but for our own survival. If we don't act now, we may find ourselves caught in the very disaster they've prepared for." The silence in the room deepened. Therak's words hung in the air like an unspoken truth. The aliens were dealing with a mystery far greater than they had initially believed. The humans weren't just overcompensating for failures, they were preparing for something that could reshape the galaxy itself. And the more they dug, the more it became clear that the truth might be far darker than any of them were prepared to face. The alien crew's investigation into the human ship was about to take a new turn. Captain Therick had decided that subtlety was no longer an option. If the humans had designed their ship to survive the most catastrophic failures, there had to be a deeper purpose, a reason for the over-engineering and controlled chaos embedded in every system. They were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had initially assumed. Therick and his officers made their way through the human ship once again, this time with more focus and intent. They had already toured the outer areas of the vessel, but now they needed to go deeper. If there were answers, they lay within the most secure sections, the parts of the ship designed not just for survival, but for what could only be described as endurance. The human captain, as calm as ever, greeted them again in the same courteous manner. He had been waiting for them, knowing full well they were growing suspicious. But he offered no resistance as they entered deeper into the ship's belly, moving through the labyrinth of redundant systems. "We'll start with the engines," the captain suggested, his tone polite but detached. "You'll find them quite impressive, designed to adapt to almost any conditions." As they stepped into the engine room, Therick noticed something odd. The engines hummed with power, but the room itself felt too still, too perfect. There were no signs of strain, no hint of the overworked machinery they had suspected. In fact, it seemed almost too efficient. Kylus, ever the detail-oriented officer, walked up to one of the engine panels and began examining the data. "These engines are not built to survive anything," he muttered, his voice growing more uncertain. "They're built to be repaired and recalibrated while in operation. The systems are constantly adjusting themselves, even when there's no sign of trouble." Therick's eyes narrowed. It's like they've engineered a system that expects failure, but they don't actually let it happen. The human captain stood silently, watching them. Therick turned toward him, his suspicion now palpable. "Tell me, Captain, do your engines ever fail completely?" The captain smiled, but this time, the smile didn't seem entirely friendly. "Not for long. There's always a backup." Therick's thoughts spun faster now. He had suspected for some time that the human ship wasn't just built for survival, it was built to withstand ongoing challenges, with no end in sight. Every system, every backup, every redundant part had a purpose beyond maintenance. They weren't just keeping the ship running. They were evolving it in real time. As the inspection continued, the crew found more strange and unsettling systems. The life support systems weren't merely designed to keep everyone alive in case of failure. They were specifically engineered to recover from failures before they could even be perceived. Air filtration systems were set to activate in a precise order, ensuring no sudden drop in oxygen levels could occur. Power grids were designed to siphon energy from one system to another if one source were to overheat. It was as though the entire ship had been constructed to predict failure and prevent it before anyone could realize it was even a threat. Finally, they'd reached the heart of the ship, the central command room. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The room was filled with holographic displays and vast data storage systems, but most notably, there was a central core surrounded by layers of protective shields and redundant circuits. This was the ship's brain, its operational center, where every system converged and recalibrated itself when needed. Kylus moved toward the core, his hand hovering just above the surface of the console. "What is this?" "It's not just a command center. It's an entire neural network that controls the entire ship's systems. It can't be purely mechanical. This is organic." Therick's stomach tightened. They had expected to find something unique about the humans, but nothing could have prepared them for the realization that their technology wasn't simply advanced. It was hybridized with something biological, something that could adapt in ways they hadn't imagined. "Captain," Therick said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind, "I need you to tell me exactly what your ship is preparing for. What catastrophe are you expecting?" The human captain's gaze remained unreadable. "You've seen it yourself. We build to survive, No more, no less. But something in his eyes betrayed him. Theric could see the faintest flicker of hesitation, as if the captain knew more than he was willing to share. "We've seen your ship's systems," Theric pressed, "and we've seen how they work. They don't just maintain. They anticipate, they recover, and they evolve. What do you know, Captain? What is coming?" The captain's smile was gone now. He stood silently for a long moment before answering. "You've seen enough to understand, but I can't explain everything. You'll have to see it for yourself. Soon, you'll understand why we have to be ready." Theric's heart raced. The captain's words were cryptic, but they carried a weight of truth. The humans were preparing for something, but they weren't just preparing to survive. They were preparing to outlast whatever was coming. And the more Theric thought about it, the more he realized that the humans weren't the only ones who might be in danger. The alien crew stood in the heart of the human ship's command center, surrounded by holographic interfaces and walls of data streaming in real time. It was a dizzying display of technology, but more than that, it felt like they were witnessing a living organism at work. Theric's mind buzzed with questions, yet all he could hear in the back of his thoughts was the same unsettling refrain. What are they preparing for? The human captain's cryptic statement lingered in the air. "Soon, you'll understand why we have to be ready." It felt like a challenge, a test. Theric couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay somewhere deeper within the ship, perhaps even beyond the visible systems. But the captain's vague words left him feeling more like a pawn in a game he wasn't meant to understand, at least not yet. After a long silence, Theric spoke, his voice sharp with determination. "Tell me, Captain, are you planning on keeping us in the dark forever? You've shown us how your ship works, but you're still withholding something. What is it that you're truly preparing for?" The human captain's demeanor didn't change. He remained calm, his posture unflinching as if he was used to being questioned. But there was a hint of something darker in his eyes now. Fear. Theric couldn't tell, but he felt an uneasy shift in the room. "Captain, we've seen the redundancy," Theric continued, his tone low, almost accusing. "But what we haven't seen is why. Why are you preparing for failure? Why have you engineered systems to fail and yet prevent failure from happening? You don't just anticipate problems. You prepare for disasters." The captain hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering to the side, as if contemplating whether to reveal more. Finally, his voice broke the silence, quieter now, almost as if he were sharing a secret. "You're right, Captain Theric," the human captain said. "We don't just prepare for failure. We prepare for the inevitable." Theric's heart skipped a beat. "Inevitable? What do you mean?" The human captain took a slow breath. "You've seen our history. You've seen the wars, the destruction, the countless failures. But we've learned something over time, something we couldn't have known before. There is something out there in the universe, something that will come for us, and it's inevitable." Theric's mind raced. Something that will come for them. The implications of the captain's words hit him like a physical blow. The humans weren't just preparing for a disaster, they were preparing for an enemy that had been stalking the galaxy long before they ever realized it. "We've studied it," the captain continued. "We've encountered signs of it for centuries, though we've only recently begun to understand its true nature. It's not a natural disaster, nor is it a force we can defeat in battle. It's something far worse." Theric's gut tightened. "What are you talking about?" The human captain paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know what it is, but we know it's coming. Something is hunting us, and it's not like anything we faced before. We call it the Vorath, a force that comes from the dark edges of space, unstoppable, merciless, and silent." Theric's breath caught in his throat. He had never heard of such a thing, nor had any of the galaxy's most advanced races. The Vorath was not a term he recognized. "What is it? What do you know about it?" The human captain's gaze grew distant, as if reliving something terrible. "We don't know much. It doesn't communicate. It doesn't leave anything behind when it attacks. It doesn't need to. It simply consumes. Entire colonies, fleets, whole worlds, vanished without a trace. The Vorath don't leave survivors. Therak felt the weight of the captain's words settle over him like a shadow. This wasn't some small-scale disaster. This was a force of nature, something that humanity had been tracking in secret, a predator lurking just beyond the known reaches of space. "Why haven't you told anyone?" Kylus asked, his voice sharp. "Why keep this to yourselves?" The captain didn't answer immediately. His eyes met Kylus's, and for a moment, Therak saw a flicker of emotion, something akin to regret, perhaps even fear. "We couldn't," the captain finally said. "No one would believe us. The Vorath don't leave evidence of their existence. The only warning we have is their approach, and even then, it's subtle. We've been preparing in silence, building our ships to survive, to endure, to be ready for something that may never even come. But we know this. When it does come, it will be too late to stop it." Therak stood frozen, his mind grappling with the implications. The humans had been preparing not just for survival, but for extinction. They had engineered their ships, their systems, and their entire way of life for a silent predator that could erase entire civilizations without warning. The room was heavy with the gravity of the revelation. Therak knew that the humans' obsession with redundancy wasn't just paranoia. It was their only chance to survive the unthinkable. And now, it was clear that the Vorath were not just a threat to humanity. They were a threat to every living being in the galaxy. The room was silent as the weight of the captain's words settled over everyone. Therak could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive, as if the very walls of the ship had grown heavier with the knowledge of what was to come. The Vorath, a force that didn't just destroy, it erased. Entire civilizations, whole planets, wiped from existence without a single trace. No signs, no messages, no wreckage, nothing but a void left behind. For the first time since they had boarded the human vessel, Therak felt a shiver of doubt. It wasn't just about the humans anymore. If what the captain had said was true, the Vorath were not just a threat to humanity. They were a threat to everyone, to every species, every race, every empire that inhabited the galaxy. The human captain's gaze was unwavering as he spoke again, his voice solemn. "You've heard the stories of the Vorath, or perhaps you haven't. They come from beyond the known borders, from the dark, uncharted reaches of space. The first signs were subtle. Abandoned ships, missing colonies. But it wasn't until the first major fleet disappeared that we realized the scope of what we were dealing with." Therak couldn't help but feel a cold sweat creep across his skin. The Vorath were not just a myth. They weren't some ancient legend. They were real. They were out there, and they were coming. "What can we do?" Therak asked, his voice steady, but tinged with a hint of urgency. The human captain's eyes darkened. "That's the problem. We don't know. We've tried everything. Scans, weapons, defensive strategies. Nothing works. They don't engage in battle. They don't leave any survivors. And they don't communicate. They consume entire star systems, entire populations, without any trace." Kylus, who had remained silent until now, spoke up, his voice laced with disbelief. "But how? How can something that powerful just appear out of nowhere, destroy everything, and leave no trace?" "We've been trying to figure that out for years," the captain replied. "We've studied every attack, every missing ship, every disappearance. There's a pattern, but it's not clear. We think the Vorath are some sort of advanced collective, a predatory intelligence that doesn't need resources or to engage in traditional warfare. They only take." Therak's mind raced as he processed the captain's words. The Vorath weren't just a force of nature. They were intelligent, and they hunted. It wasn't just about war or conquest. The Vorath didn't leave any survivors because they weren't interested in a fight. They were annihilating everything in their path because it was in their nature to do so. "We've been preparing for years," the captain continued. But our ships, our systems, our defenses, they're all based on survival, not on defeating the Vorath. We've built our ships to endure, to survive the inevitable. But I fear that even our best efforts might not be enough. The words hit Therak like a physical blow. Even the humans, with their advanced technology, their knowledge, and their desperate preparations, weren't certain they could survive what was coming. If that was true, what hope did the rest of the galaxy have? But we don't have much time, the captain added. The Vorath won't announce their arrival. They'll strike without warning. And when they do, it will be too late to prepare. That's why we built our ships the way we did. That's why we've worked in silence, to create a network of survivors who can endure for as long as possible when the time comes. Therak looked around the room at his officers, their faces grim. They had come to this human ship searching for answers, but now they were faced with a far greater question. What would they do? How could they prepare for something so far beyond their understanding, so destructive and pervasive? Captain, Therak said, his voice resolute, we've seen what your people have done. You've prepared for the worst. But now, the question is, what are we going to do? We can't just sit back and watch this unfold. If the Vorath are as dangerous as you say, if they're coming for all of us, then we need to fight back. Together. The human captain's eyes softened, but there was no hope in them. We've tried. You can't fight what doesn't need to fight. But if you want to try, I won't stop you. You're welcome to join us in preparing for the worst. But know this, fighting the Vorath isn't about winning. It's about surviving for as long as you can. And that's a hard truth for anyone to accept. Therak felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. There was no guarantee of victory. There was no surefire way to survive the coming storm. But humanity had proven one thing beyond doubt. They would do whatever it took to endure. The aliens had learned a valuable lesson from humanity. It wasn't enough to just survive the fight. The true battle was against the inevitable. And as the Vorath loomed on the horizon, Therak knew one thing with certainty. The galaxy was about to face an extinction-level threat that no one could afford to ignore. The battle for survival had begun.